Chapter 4: A Troubling Culmination. Demian opened his eyes with a start. The first thing he noticed was the warm body snuggling up to him. Remi was curled up against his side, one arm thrown over his chest while his face nuzzled Demian's neck. Demian's heart stopped before beating in double time and his blood ran warm. Why was Remi so close? He closed his eyes and sucked in a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. If he recalled correctly, the night grew chilly, so they decided to push the mats together and throw both blankets over top. But that still didn't explain why Remi was sleeping on top of him. He leaned up onto his elbows without disturbing the sleeping Remi. From this angle, Demian was able to breathe in Remi's scent better, both his natural smell and the scent of the homemade soap he had made using wild plants and berries. He brought a hand up and ran it through Remi's hair gently, finding it soft to the touch. Why did he always find himself hanging around Lady Ophelia Rosewood when he was undeniably drawn to Remi Sato? He not only found the man physically attractive but also his inner self, or at least the parts that Remi had willingly exposed to him. And Demian loved that cocky smirk he wore when he talked about plant life. Remi stirred, snuggling in closer. His face moved in just the right way that his lips touched Demian's bare skin. Bare. Right. Even though it was chilly, he took off his shirt in the middle of the night because he was afraid Remi would find the smell displeasing. Remi's eyes blinked open. He peered up at Demian with a dazed, contented look. Demian couldn't help the smile that came over him. "Good morning," he told the beta. Before Remi could even finish his sentence, a shudder ran through both of them as a great wave of magic flooded the area. Just as quickly as it had come, it disappeared. Remi jumped up with wide eyes. "Shit. I didn't know it was going to appear this early," he shouted in a panic. Appear? What had appeared and what was Remi talking about? The questions bounced around loudly in Demian's head. Remi ran out of the tent after grabbing his discarded dagger. Demian quickly pulled on his shirt and grabbed his weapon before following the panicking Remi. Ronnie and Brendan were exiting their tent wearing matching expressions of apprehensive worry. A shadow fell across the small clearing, blocking out the early morning light. All four of them looked up simultaneously. A large silver body of around 3 meters with a wingspan of 4 was flying over them. Demian felt his blood turn to ice as his mouth dropped open in an undignified manner. "Is that a dragon?" Brendan screeched. Remi shook his head, his gaze focused somewhere deeper in the forest. "A wyvern. It's smaller than a dragon and has a lower mana capacity. It's also not as mentally developed," Remi explained calmly, though his were slightly larger than normal. "Close enough," Brandon hollered. His breathing was rapid and his hands were twitching. He wanted to run but had nowhere to go. "Let's teleport back. We need to let the knights know." Ronnie was the voice of reason. He turned back to his tent, his long black swaying with his rapid movements. He came back out of the tent with the small red orb that the mage had given them just the day before. He held it out for everyone to touch. Remi placed his hand in last. His eyes flicked back to where the wyvern had disappeared to. Demian was starting to worry that the beta was going to do something crazy. "Ready minus." Remi removed his hand just as Ronnie voiced out the first half of the word to activate the stone. "Toos." Demian removed his hand just before the red light enveloped him. "What did you do?" Remi shouted when he saw that Demian had not teleported with the others. "It looked like you were about to do something crazy." "I couldn't let you do it alone," Demian said and flashed a grin that hid how utterly terrified he was at the moment. "Me? You're the one that did something stupid. Don't you know how dangerous this is?" Remi's voice rose with his distress. Demian's eyes widened at Remi's outburst. The corner of his lips hooked up and his nerves calmed down. Something about seeing Remi scared on his behalf calmed him down. "Stop smiling. A wyvern is not something to smile about," Remi growled. "It is not," Demian readily agreed. He walked until he stood in front of Remi and tipped the beta's head back with his hand on his chin. "We'll both be fine. I'm stronger than I look." Demian was laying bare a part of his soul in those words as he spoke the truth. He was in fact a lot stronger than he looked, especially without his inhibitor. Remi looked up at him with water eyes, face pale, and chapped lips slightly parted. He gulped and the Adam's apple at his throat bobbed. Demian had the sudden urge to bite down on it but held himself back. It wasn't the time yet, not when he had yet to figure out what was going on with him and his heart. Remi blinked, his long lashes casting dark shadows on his cheeks. "Fine, but don't do anything reckless," he said after a long second. "Should I not be saying that to you?" Demian shot back with a grin. Dane had just come back to the camp with a few birds he had caught. He defeathered the animals and got them ready to be cooked. Shanna came out of her tent, suppressing a yawn. "That girl kicks in her sleep," she grumbled in annoyance, bags underneath her eyes. Dane hummed nonchalantly. He felt no animosity towards the girl, though he was still wary of her. Last night, he had completed his liege's mission and checked her belongings while she was asleep. He wanted to check Ophelia's as well but didn't get the chance when the girl started to wake up. Marcus came out of the tent that he and Dane had shared. "Smells good," he praised as he sniffed the air, his stomach letting out a low grumble. Dane handed him one of the cooked birds still tied to a stick. He then handed one to Shanna. "Shall we wake Ophelia up?" Marcus questioned, trying to take a bite of the hot meal. Shanna snorted. "She should be good to go with all the sleep she got last night." Her voice was laced heavily with sarcasm and disdain. Dane didn't know what to say, so he was going to grunt a reply but never got the chance. An intense wave of dense mana pulsated in the air, drawing closer to them. He dropped his breakfast and grabbed the dagger at his belt loop and drew his magic forth, preparing for the incoming threat. Shanna and Marcus both dropped their food and turned deathly pale. "Grab Ophelia," Dane told them through gritted teeth, finding it hard to fight off his instincts to run. Shanna was the first one to shake herself out of her terrified state. She rushed back into the tent and grabbed Ophelia. Marcus ran to her side and helped her in her struggle with carrying the still sleeping girl. Dane shoved his hand into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out the warping orb. He pulled the small red orb out and readied his dagger. He poured his magic out and into the dagger. Black sapphire buried deep in the earth broke free and wrapped around the dagger, extending it into a long, curved sword. Just before the others reached him, a large shadow fell over top of them, blocking out the morning sun. The shadow grew larger and larger. Demian looked up and felt his blood freeze. Flying above them was an adult wyvern. The wyvern dropped down into the small clearing with a ground-shaking thud. Shanna and Marcus stumbled, dropping Ophelia on the dewy ground. Ophelia woke up with a start, ready to holler at whoever was disturbing her rest. The first thing she saw was that she was outside on the ground. The second thing she saw was the massive creature. She screamed at the top of her lungs while she scrambled to stand. Dane slowly backed away from the wyvern, trying to get closer to the others, his sword drawn and at the ready. His eyes never left the beast, who had its teeth bared and talons drawn. The wyvern spread out its wings and growled, scraping its front paws against the ground. Something hard slammed into Dane. He steadied himself to keep from falling while not removing his eyes from the wyvern, who had yet to attack. The object that had slammed into him removed themselves from him along with the orb that had been in his free hand. Startled, Dane looked down and found Ophelia there, the warping orb in her hands. Shanna and Marcus rushed over while keeping their eyes on the wyvern, their daggers drawn. Then Ophelia did something none of them expected her to do. She backed away from them and spoke the command to return her back to the edge of the forest where the staff were. Marcus and Shanna ran forward, their arms reaching out towards Ophelia. The wyvern swung its tail and struck it against the three that were moving around. The tip of its tail struck Shanna and sent her flying into a tree. Marcus ducked to avoid being hit. He reached out and grabbed a hold of Ophelia just as the red light surrounded her. Dane watched as the two disappeared from sight. He turned his attention back to the wyvern and ran forward while it was momentarily distracted by tearing through the tents. Mattias was at the school when he received a message from one of the first-year teachers who were staying in the clearing where a dais and tents were pitched up. He grabbed the warping orb and teleported to the clearing. The first thing he noticed upon arriving was that a bunch of students were pouring into the clearing. The students were scared and panicky. The staff members were running about trying to calm them down. He instinctively spread out his mana and searched the area of the Evershire forest. He instantly picked up the mana of a wyvern. The mana fluctuated, telling him that the creature was in a confused state of mind. The teacher that had contacted him ran forward when she noticed him. The students reported the arrival of a dragon. "We're trying to calm down the ones that have returned," they told him. Mattias nodded along, a serious expression on his face. Instead of correcting her, he gathered some of the knights and mages that were stationed in the clearing in case of emergencies. He directed them into two groups, one to search the forest for missing students and the other to fight the wyvern. Just then, two students appeared. "We need to go back," the boy yelled at the girl with long, matted blonde hair. "Are you crazy? They're already dead," the girl screamed. Mattias recognized the girl as Ophelia Rosewood. If he remembered correctly, he had placed Dane Willie in the same group. He walked over to where they were. The boy was making a grab for the warping orb in Ophelia's clutched fist. "Will you mind telling me what happened out there?" He wore a fake, comforting smile on his face while keeping his tone soft yet commanding. "Headmaster Arian," the two exclaimed in shock. They both bowed and politely greeted him. Remi ran forward, following the general direction of where the wyvern had gone, Demian hot on his heels. He stayed right with Remi, even slowing down so as to not surpass him. He wanted to keep this reckless beta in his sights. They barreled through the woods, jumping over large rocks and slicing through foliage that might slow them down. They didn't encounter any wildlife, including magical beasts, which helped them speed along. Before long, they cut through the tree line and into a large clearing. The remnants of a camp were seen. The tents had been slashed and items were strewn about. There were broken tree shards and branches all over the ground. A girl with long black hair was slumped limply on the ground underneath a tree. Thankfully, there were no visible injuries on her that Demian could see. The beast that had caused all this mess was locked in a fierce battle. Its silver scales were bleeding in several spots and one of its glowing silver eyes had a long gash going through it. Dane, who had been fighting the wyvern by himself, had the legs of his trousers torn with blood seeping through the material. One arm hung limp at his side while in his other hand was a shining black sword. "Check on Shanna," Remi told Demian as he ran towards Dane's side. Demian reached an arm out and stopped him by grabbing a hold of his wrist. "I'm a much better fighter. You go check on Shanna." Demian didn't leave any room for argument as he sprinted towards the injured beta. He called forth his water magic and fine-tuned it into a sharp blade around his dagger. It really sucked that they were only allowed daggers and no other weapons. Demian reached Dane's side. The guy looked even worse up close. "Let me help," he said. Dane didn't even acknowledge him as he lunged forward. Demian didn't pay it any mind as he did the same. Dane ran low, his balance uneven as he sliced his sword in an arc. His sword made of black sapphire curved, slicing the wyvern's toe cleanly off. Demian jumped high in the air and sliced towards the monster's arm. The wyvern lurched back just before the blade of water made contact. The wyvern released a low growl. Its large tail flicked up before swinging towards Dane. The tip of the tail struck the beta square in the chest, sending him flying. Demian landed on the ground and leapt back, sparing a quick glance towards his fallen comrade. Dane had struck a tree and was laying on the ground in a crumpled heap. Blood flowed freely from the open wound on his shoulder. Remi ran over towards him, and the white glow of his healing magic flowed from his open palms. He returned his gaze back to his opponent. He readjusted his stance before charging forward once again. Adding water, he extended the length of his blade. The wyvern flicked its tail, raising it up in the air and aiming it at Demian. Demian dropped to the ground and rolled out of the way. At the same time, he brought up his sword and made a slicing motion, cutting a vertical line that extended a few feet into the thick scales. He jumped back to his feet and ran straight at the wyvern, avoiding its tail and feet in its rampage. He sliced his sword through the air, glancing a hit on the creature's back leg. The battle went on for what felt like hours, though it had only been for a few minutes. Demian was able to score in a few good nicks, but unfortunately, so did the wyvern. Demian had a sprained wrist and cracked rib from where he had been hit with an unsuspecting wing. "Let me help." Remi appeared beside him. "No, stay back and protect the others," came Demian's immediate reply. He didn't know what he would do if something were to happen to Remi. It was a thought he didn't want to entertain. "The others are healed and safe. I pulled them away from the battle. Let me help." To emphasize his words, Remi shot off a fireball, hitting the creature in the snout. "Fine. But stay back." Demian relented. Demian continued attacking with his water blade, his mana slowly draining, while Remi supported him by giving him quick heals every once in a while and throwing perfectly aimed fireballs at the wyvern. The wyvern's once silvery scales were now covered in dirt and blood, open wounds, and singe marks. The creature snapped its jaws at Demian, just missing him by a hair's breadth. Demian had jumped back to avoid the snapping teeth while keeping a constant vigilance on Remi's position so that if he needed to, Demian could swoop in to protect him. The wyvern flapped its wings and jumped into the air. A terrible situation had just turned into a grave one. They were equipped to fight on the ground, not in the sky where the wyvern had a clear advantage. Remi shot off a fireball, one far larger than those before it. The fiery mass soared in the sky and hit the wyvern in one of its wings, burning through the tender material. The wyvern let out a screech that made Remi and Demian flinch. It frantically flapped its remaining working wing to no avail. The massive creature plummeted towards the earth, landing with a ground-shaking thud that sent Remi falling to the ground and Demian onto his knees. Demian quickly readjusted his posture and ran towards the disoriented creature. He raised his water sword above his head and brought it down, slicing the creature's head cleanly off. Remi looked away, green in the face. A smile spread across Demian's tired countenance. He wanted nothing more than to pass out from exhaustion, but he fought against the urge and staggeringly made his way towards the still green-looking Remi. "We did it." His blue eyes shone as bright as his smile even though sweat soaked his hair, making it appear black and poured down onto his face. Remi didn't look much better than him with his bangs plastered to his forehead and his face, finally not green anymore, had splotchy red patches all over it. "We did," he said tiredly, a small smile tugging on his pale lips. A bright red light appeared, illuminating the small clearing. "Oh my!" the headmaster exclaimed in shock with a hand over his lips. His golden eyes were round. "No one is hurt, are they?" he asked as he took in the 4 students, 2 of which were still unconscious. Standing behind the headmaster were a group of knights and mages. The mages dispersed to each of the students to check on them, their cloaks billowing behind them like the wings of a bat. The knights made their way to the decapitated wyvern. Their uniforms were form-fitting and pristine, a stark contrast against the mages, though both were garbed in white. Demian helped Remi to a stand just as 2 mages came over to them, casting healing and recovery spells. Their casting speed was quick and precise, showing why they were mages instead of knights. Both knights and mages could use elemental magic, but mages were far quicker in casting and could perform a wider range of spells than most knights. The headmaster strode over to Remi and Demian. "It looks like the 4 of you had it rough." He placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "You 2 accomplished an amazing feat, though I hope that the 2 of you will never do something like this again." He warned them in a pleasant yet hard voice. "Definitely not," Remi and Demian spoke at the same time. The 2 of them shared a look. Remi's lips turned up into a smirk which caused Demian to laugh. The mages finally stopped treating them. None of them had any major injuries, one of them informed the headmaster. The headmaster looked down at the 2 and his thin lips turned up into a scary-looking smile that sent shivers down Demian's spine. "That's good to hear," he said. The mages that had been treating Lady Shanna and Dane came over while carrying the 2 of them with wind magic. "Their injuries have been treated. Now they just need some rest," an older-looking mage informed the headmaster. The headmaster's golden eyes softened as they looked down at the 2 sleeping students. "That certainly is good to hear," he spoke softly. Demian noticed the man's gaze lingered on Dane's prone form. Something bumped into his arm. Demian looked down into the beautiful orbs that were Remi's eyes. He really was such a beautiful creature, even more so like this. "Thanks. I owe you one," Remi told him. "How about a date?" Demian said, half jokingly and half serious. Remi's eyes rounded and a pleased smile graced his lips. I can do that. The beta spoke in a calm voice that was laced lightly with excitement. Thump. Demian's heart somersaulted and butterflies filled his stomach. It was a confirmation that he hadn't been expecting. Fighting a wyvern had totally been worth it, even if it did scare the crap out of him. He inhaled to calm his racing heart. We have a 3-day weekend, he was able to say slowly, his voice even. Remi's smile widened. We did win this competition, huh? He leaned in closer, their faces were just inches apart. Just let me know if you want an indoor date or an outdoor one, he emphasized with a wink. We're not all proper dates outside, or at least in a tea room. It took him a moment to realize what Remi meant by his words, and when he did, his face exploded into a brilliant shade of red. How could someone so boldly offer to do that? But Remi was a beta and a male, so it wasn't completely unacceptable as it would have been if he were an omega or a girl. Demian glanced over at the decapitated wyvern. That stupid thing should have shown up a lot sooner if he knew this was to be the outcome. He turned his attention back to that alluring beta who was still looking at him. Whatever you want to do, I'll leave it up to you, he said, trying to play it cool. Remi's lips quirked into a smirk and he leaned in closer, his reddened ears hidden by his hair. I know which one I prefer. Demian's blood boiled, heat pooling down low. This was clearly flirting. Before Demian could reply or act on his instincts, he wasn't sure which side was winning. The headmaster gathered everyone together. The red light of the warping orb surrounded all of them but 2 knights. Those 2 knights were staying behind to look after the wyvern's body, which would most likely be used for magic tools and ingredients. When the light dispersed, the group was standing in the large field outside the forest. The rest of their class was already there. Most of them were huddled into groups, looking excited. There were quite a few students that looked scared and some were even crying. The staff who had been left behind to protect the students came running over when they saw the headmaster. Is it already over? Mr. Ordish asked in disappointed disbelief. If one had to guess, the ex-mercenary was upset at being left behind. A professor with piercing yellow eyes and long green hair glared at Mr. Ordish. The professor then proceeded to push his glasses up his nose with one finger. We should be more worried about the health of the students, he chided. A plump woman with short curly brown hair shook her head. No, Ordish is right. We need to worry about the dragon. The other staff members chimed in with their own opinions. The headmaster cleared his throat, effectively obtaining their full attention. The monster spotted was not a dragon but a wyvern, and it had already been taken care of by the time we arrived, by these 3 brave and reckless students. He swept a hand out to include Demian, Remi, and the unconscious Dane. Demian wasn't sure how the headmaster had known that Lady Shanna hadn't participated. Gasps and startled cries resounded through the gathered staff and knights who hadn't accompanied the headmaster. All eyes turned toward him and Remi. Mr. Ordish broke free from the crowd and took Remi by the shoulders, spinning him around. You are not hurt, are you? He asked. A chuckle escaped from the poor beta who was still being checked for injuries by Mr. Ordish. No, I am not. A mage even checked me out, Remi said. A hot flash of rage filled Demian at seeing Remi handled in that manner, but luckily he was able to clamp down on the rising urges within him before he did something stupid, like attack a teacher. Mr. Ordish's shoulders relaxed and he visibly released his breath in a long exhale. Good. That's good. The green-haired teacher looked between Remi and Mr. Ordish with suspicion. You seem quite close with young Master Sato, came his austere comment. A lot of teachers nodded along, agreeing to the statement to some extent. Demian also felt a little weird about their interaction. A teacher should hold worry for their pupil but not to the point where they feel comfortable to be handy with them. He was jealous of how natural Mr. Ordish was making it look when he touched Remi so casually. Mr. Ordish rubbed the back of his head. I did a job for his parents before, so I met him when he was a little tight. Demian became jealous once again, but for a whole other reason. He wanted to see what Remi was like as a kid. Before anyone could say anything else, the headmaster cleared his throat once again. We should let these 4 head back to rest. And we still need to address the rest of the students. He pointed his chin toward the rest of the first years who were looking in their direction with curious gazes. 2 knights stepped forward to escort them back to the school. The mages that were levitating Dane and Shanna accompanied them. One of the knights pulled out a warping orb. The 8 of them gathered together and the knight spoke the command that would return them to the campus. They found themselves in the courtyard in front of the main building once the red light faded. We should get these 2 to the infirmary so they can recuperate, the mage carrying Shanna suggested. The knights nodded in agreement. The knight who used the warping orb spoke first. I'll accompany them to the infirmary while you take the other 2 back to their dorms, he told the other knight. Yes, sir, the knight mock saluted, a smirk placed firmly on his lips. The snicker from his side had Demian looking down. Remi was looking at the knight's silly antics with amusement. A smile unconsciously formed on his lips and his gaze softened. This did not go unnoticed by the knight who had finally turned serious. The group parted ways. The older knight went with the mages to the infirmary while the younger of the 2 led Remi and Demian back to their dorms. The walk was quiet, giving Demian plenty of time to think over his and Remi's earlier conversation. He felt elated in knowing that he was going to get to go on a date with Remi, while on the other hand he couldn't help but wonder if this was just Remi's way of thanking him and that his words didn't have a more serious meaning like Demian hoped for them to have. Demian was perfectly happy with either option of date Remi decided upon, but Demian knew that he would not be satisfied with just one date, especially if it were the indoor date Remi had mentioned. They arrived at Remi's dormitory first. Remi thanked the knight and then bid farewell to Demian before walking into the building. Demian hesitated at the entrance. He was torn between going back to his room to rest and following Remi. The knight at his side snickered, a knowing smirk was perpetually fixed on his face. Follow him. If anyone asks, I dropped you off at your room. A smile graced Demian's lips as he thanked the knight. He turned around and ran into the building. He caught up to Remi right outside his room's door. Remi. Remi turned around, his expression morphed from confusion to pleased and cocky in the span of a second. Is there anything I can do for you, Your Highness? He asked teasingly. Demian knew Remi was joking by his tone of voice and his facial expression, but Demian still didn't like hearing that title coming from Remi's lips. I want to ask about our date this coming weekend, Demian said, a flutter in his heart. Mattias stepped down from the temporary dais. Despite his appearance, he actually wasn't that fond of giving speeches. They were extremely headache-inducing. The knight lieutenant that had stayed behind at the site of the attack came over to him. Mattias knew the knight had come back from the feel of the space bending from magic. Headmaster Arian, the knight lieutenant started after making sure no one was around to listen in on them. Mattias quickly put up a soundproofing barrier without anyone realizing, just to be on the safe side. The knight pulled out a small pouch and Mattias knew what it was by the smell alone. He felt the veins in his hands contracting. It's a bag of Morona, the knight said, confirming what Mattias already knew from the smell alone. I found it in one of the destroyed tents. The knight continued with his report. Mattias pinched the bridge of his nose. So, someone was stupid enough to bring Morona along on a hunting trip. It would surely secure their victory as long as nothing more than they could handle showed up. Morona was a small sagittate, an arrow-shaped leaf that was bluish-green in color with a burgundy color towards the base. The Morona had strong pheromone-inducing properties that attracts magical beasts in its raw form. The only question was, did one of the students do this on purpose to ensure they won the competition? Or was it a case of sabotage? The knight lieutenant pocketed the Morona. It was in the tent the girls shared based on the items that were still intact. This narrowed their suspects down to Shanna Bourgeois and Ophelia Rosewood. While one had the means and motives, his instincts pointed towards the other. And his instincts were hardly ever wrong. I want to ask about our date this coming weekend, Demian said hesitantly. Remi fought back the smirk that wanted to come out. He opened the door to his room and gestured for Demian to follow him. What do you want to ask? He asked Demian after he sat down on the bed. Demian stood in the center of the room, looking around with curious eyes. Oh, how Remi loved those eyes that were deeper than an ocean at night. Demian turned his eyes onto him and Remi could see the hesitation in them. Remi released a sigh. If you don't want to go on a date with me, we minus no. Demian's frantic shout cut Remi off in mid-sentence while effectively startling them both. What I mean is minus. Demian nervously rubbed the back of his neck. Can we meet at Lorella's? He asked. Lorella was a famous bakery located in the town inside the campus gates. Sure, Remi beamed. Lorella's was his favorite sweet shop and he practically ordered Dane to go fetch him desserts from there almost every other day. Remi would go there himself, but he didn't trust himself enough to not buy out their entire stock. Though I am surprised. With my looks, I would have assumed you would pick the other option. Remi was being very forward and his words sounded arrogant, but it was the truth from his perspective. He had really hit the jackpot in looks with this reincarnation and had become quite confident over the years. Demian stared at him without saying anything for a long time. Demian finally looked away, his cheeks held a faint pink hue to them. You are certainly very attractive, but I am hoping that I may be able to ensnare you enough to agree to a second date. Demian admitted. Remi's eyes widened before lowering into crescents and a pleased smirk graced his lips. Who's to say you haven't already? Demian turned towards him with a start. His blue eyes were impeccably wide and his tongue flicked out to lick his bottom lip. Even with the way I have behaved? Which was something Demian still had to figure out. It was uncharacteristic of him to be undeniably drawn to a person but yet flock to another. Even then, Remi agreed. He got up from the bed and walked over to the door. If that was everything, then you may leave. I would really like to pass out right about now, and from the looks of the bags under your eyes, so would you. Remi said. We did have a long and exciting day. Demian chuckled as he exited the room. He turned to face Remi before leaving. I'll let you know the time later in the week. Demian told him before turning to leave. I'll be looking forward to it, smiled Remi. Dane stirred awake. Before he even opened his eyes, he noticed he was laying on something soft and plump. There were silk sheets underneath his fingertips. The knights must have found them if he was laying in a bed. Ah, you're awake now, Mr. Willie. Dane opened his eyes and turned his head to face where the voice was coming from. His nose scrunched up and his eyes narrowed when a pair of golden eyes came into his focus. The voice belonged to none other than the headmaster, Matthias Adrian, someone Dane was very suspicious of. He propped himself up on his elbows and scooted himself back until he was leaning against the headboard. Was anyone seriously hurt? Dane asked. The headmaster smiled and an amused light lit up his golden eyes, turning them yellow. No, you and Miss Bourgeois suffered the most damage. Mr. Sato and Mr. Maxwell suffered some minor injuries that were easily patched up by the mages on standby. The headmaster told him. Dane nodded, relieved to hear that his liege was safe. Though he will still have to confirm that with his own eyes. What about the wyvern? He asked. Mr. Sato and Mr. Maxwell killed it before we'd arrived. The headmaster folded his hands on his lap, his legs crossed at the knees underneath the robes he always wears. Dane's hands clenched into fists at his side and he grinded his teeth. Not only did he fail in subduing the beast, he even made his liege fight it, putting him in danger. The rustling of fabric alerted him to the headmaster's movement. The man leaned forward in his seat. As I've said, Mr. Sato is fine. What I would like to talk about are the events that led you and Miss Bourgeois being separated from the rest of your group. Dane released his breath and forced his hands to unclench. He needed to relax. It was my fault. I let my guard down as I kept all my focus on the wyvern and had not realized that Lady Ophelia had sneaked up behind me to grab the warping orb. I didn't even realize she had stopped screaming at some point. The headmaster hummed as he leaned back into his seat. I still need to corroborate your story with Miss Bourgeois, but it is helping me in knowing the truth. I had received 2 different accounts on the incident when the other half of your group arrived at the field. The man gave Dane a piercing gaze, his countenance hardening. I would like to ask about the Morona and how it came to be in your group's possession. Dane racked his brain, knowing that he had heard that name before. It was something that Remington had researched before. It's a plant that attracts magical beasts in its unrefined state. I believe it produces something akin to fake attraction. He sunk down into the bed, slouching a little, finally understanding why his liege had warned him. Remington must have been suspicious that Shanna was going to use the plant to help them win the competition. That explains why we encountered so many monsters, he finally said, his voice heavy with anger. He was angry that his group believed they needed to cheat to win and angry in the fact that he failed the task that his liege had given him. Chapter 5, Spellbound. Demian entered the cafeteria with a smile on his face. The hunting field trip was officially over and it was one day closer to his date with Remi. Remi and Dane were already there. There was an empty spot beside Remi, which was unusual since everyone, especially the girls, would vie for his attention. Remi's eyes lit up when he saw Demian and waved him over to their table. The smile he wore unconsciously grew larger and his heart felt warm. Remi was finally talking to him and not shunning his presence. Demian practically skipped over, in a princely manner, to where Remi was. Flowers were practically blooming behind him. When Demian sat down in the empty seat, he found Remi staring at him owlishly. "What is it?" Demian asked. "Why do I see flowers behind you?" He mumbled low enough that Demian couldn't make it out. "What?" Demian asked, clearly not hearing Remi. Remi's owl eyes regained their focus. "Nothing," he smiled impishly. Demian narrowed his eyes playfully and impulsively pinched Remi's cheeks, drawing shock eyes onto him. And not to mention, Dane was staring at him like he was moments away from pulling out a dagger. Demian removed his hand before it was forcibly removed from his body. He turned away and acted as if he had done nothing out of the ordinary. He missed the goofy smile that Remi wore. But he didn't miss the disgruntled snort that Dane had given. Nor the disappointed sighs from the girls surrounding them. Breakfast continued uncomfortably. The easygoing chatter of their classmates filled the air. The doors to the cafeteria opened just then. The familiar tall and slightly bulky Laxel walked in, holding the door open for a petite girl with a heart-shaped face framed with long wavy blonde hair. Demian felt sick to his stomach at seeing Ophelia, though he couldn't understand why. He knew that he had mistakenly thought he was interested in her, but that couldn't explain why he was feeling the way he was. After Laxel held the door open for Ophelia, he made his way to an empty table without looking around. Ophelia, on the other hand, stopped and locked eyes with Demian. Just then, a hand brushed against his hair. Demian looked over to see Remi wearing a smirk, though his eyes were hard as he stared at Ophelia. Demian reached for Remi's retreating hand and held it in his. It filled him with warmth in knowing that he wasn't the only one who felt jealousy. But it also hurt him greatly in knowing that he was entirely at fault for his actions and in the way he never made himself clear to Remi. They finished breakfast without incident. Demian was secretly glad that Ophelia did not approach them. He was even happier that he survived even with all the glares aimed at him. It was unusual for him to be on the other end of a person's glare, since it was usually the person Demian was with that would be receiving them. Classes passed by quickly. Most of the first-year teachers allowed for a relaxed day, and some even let class out early. They were probably afraid that some of the students would suffer from a mental breakdown, since most had seen the wyvern flying over the forest just the day prior. One wouldn't think that would cause concern for teachers, since the students were literally supposed to be hunting magical beasts, but wyverns and dragons were extremely rare. No, not rare, just hard to find. Demian made his way to the library after the last class. He found Remi and Dane in their usual spot. "Hey." Remi looked up and smiled. "Hey yourself." Demian strolled up to him and took his hand. Remi allowed himself to be pulled up into a standing position. "It's such a nice day out. Why don't you come outside and study with me?" Demian plastered on the confident yet slightly cocky smile that he practiced trying to perfect for days on end when he was younger. "Sure." Remi agreed immediately. Demian started to guide him out of the library, his hand still wrapped over top of Remi's. Dane got up to follow them as the unfailing tag-along he always seemed to be. "Why don't you stay here?" Remi suggested to Dane, clearly wanting to be alone with Demian. just as Demian wanted to be with him. The two of them made their way out of the library and down the grand, winding staircase, and out of the building. Demian led them to the East Garden. It was quite a ways walk and pretty much always devoid of students. The East Garden was just a small square enclosure. Perfectly cut hedges fenced in the area. In the center was a three-tiered fountain with small dragons carved into the base. Wow! I didn't know this place existed. Remi breathed. This was where my mother always sneaked out to meet my father after they first started courting each other. Demian told him. I didn't know that. Remi said. Demian looked down at Remi and smiled fondly. There's a lot you don't know about me. I think it's time we change that. Remi smiled up at him, his eyes curving up into crescents and a small dimple appeared on his left cheek. I agree. That definitely needs to change. They sat down on the grass underneath the fountain. Remi pulled his knees up to his chest and propped the book he had been reading onto them. Demian pulled out his own study materials from his bag and tried to focus. Emphasis on the try. Demian pulled his knees up and draped his arms over the open economics books and leaned down until the side of his face rested on his arms. He watched as Remi read, soaking up every detail. The way Remi's hair, reminiscent of chocolate, shone with golden hues in the light. The way his dark lashes curled up, framing his eyes beautifully. Or the way his tongue would flick out and lick his lower lip before pulling said lip into his teeth for the briefest of moments. A sigh escaped from him and Demian mentally scolded himself. He really had been stupid during the previous weeks. Why did he chase Ophelia? Because her scent pleased him, though not as much as Remi's did. Because she was an Omega. Because Remi had shown some sort of weird interest in her. Why did you used to follow Ophelia Rosewood? The question slipped while he was distracted by his own thoughts. Remi hummed but never looked up from his book. Something about her stuck out. She was also always in strange confrontations with you, Laxel, and Ebony. Remi admitted softly but confidently. Ebony. Ebony Lestro? The third prince of the Harlow Kingdom? I didn't know she knew him, Demian admitted. Not only was Ophelia acquainted with a prince and the son of a duke from the Grove Kingdom, but was also acquainted with a prince from the Harlow Kingdom. He had to admit that was impressive if not a bit concerning. Oi, Remi hummed once again, still not taking his eyes off of his book. Curiosity got the better of him. Demian unfolded himself and reached out and grabbed Remi's book right out from under him. Remi let out an indignant cry and tried to grab the book back from him. Demian held one hand against Remi's chest and leaned back so that he was out of the beta's desperately reaching grasp. He peered down at the words written on the page and instantly felt himself locked up and his face turned red. Remi actually read this kind of stuff. Give that back. Remi pushed Demian's frozen arm away from him and grabbed the stolen book. Serves you right, he huffed when Demian continued to stay locked up. You actually read that minus Remi blinked at him before an O escaped from him. So that was the real reason behind you wanting to take me to Lorla's. You know, you're surprisingly innocent. Demian, who had finally been able to move, froze up again. So what if I am? What about you? A smile spread across Remi's face. I am. That's why I was studying. Remi admitted without a trace of being embarrassed. And he choked. Demian choked on non-existent saliva and heat swarmed through his veins. Was he the reason for Remi's study? Suddenly filled with confidence, his body pressed into Remi, caging him against the fountain. Am I the reason you're studying? He whispered huskily against Remi's ear. A shiver ran through Remi, not going unnoticed by Demian. A smirk spread onto his lips and his confidence doubled. He took Remi's earlobe in between his teeth and gave it a nibble, sliding his tongue against the rim. I'm suddenly looking forward to our date, he breathed into Remi's ear as he pulled away. Remi shivered at the closeness. He wrapped an arm around Demian's neck. So am I, his voice was low and breathy. Demian was pleased with himself. Who knew he could draw out this kind of reaction from this endearing person? He was really looking forward to putting this studying into practice. A throat being cleared startled the two. They jumped with a start and parted from each other. Dane's eyes were as cold as ice as he looked at Demian as if he were a fly. I thought I told you to stay in the library, Remi glared, clearly agitated at being interrupted. Dane gave him a pointed look before training his gaze back onto Demian. I couldn't see you from the library windows. This answer drew a loud groan out of Remi and a silent one out of Demian. Demian searched through his wardrobe. It was finally the day that he and Remi agreed to meet for their date. He tossed out the beige suit, instantly ruling that one out. The eggplant-colored suit was put in the maybe pile. Wait, why was he just looking at suits? Was there a rule that states a man must wear a suit on a date? Demian groaned. He didn't need to make this any more complicated. If he does not choose an outfit soon, he'll be late. Well, he would still be on time. He just wanted to get there before Remi. He finally settled on an ultramarine suit that had mulberry red stripes on the legs. The mulberry color sort of reminded him of Remi's eyes at night. Those pinkish hues could resemble the delicious color of mulberry wine when in the dark with only the moon's light to illuminate them. After quickly changing into the suit, he fixed his hair. With a little bit of gel, he slicked the majority of his hair back while side-sweeping a portion of his bangs. Once he deemed himself presentable, he rushed out of the room. It was early afternoon out and the weather was pleasantly perfect. Though it could probably be raining and Demian would still think that it was perfect. He was on his way to the agreed meeting spot out front of the main building when he was stopped by a familiar voice. Demian. Ophelia called out, running over to him. Out of his better judgment, he slowed down so she could catch up. She was out of breath when she reached him. Demian. Where have you been? You haven't been eating with me and Laxel here lately, nor have we seen you outside of class. She spoke with worry. This was going to be embarrassing for them both, not that he cared. She was making him late to his meeting with Remi. I'm sorry, Ophelia, but I'll no longer be hanging out with the two of you. I'm still willing to help you if you come into trouble, though barely. His opinion of Ophelia had gone down when he heard from Remi about what she did to Dane and Shanna. And poor Lady Shanna. She had been kicked out of the school for possessing an illegal and dangerous herb. Ophelia put a hand on his arm. He shook it off and turned to leave. Stopping, he said over his shoulder, I'm sorry if I gave you false hope, but you are nothing more than a classmate to me. He corrected himself when he realized that he didn't have any classes with her since she was an Omega. No, an acquaintance. He then left without looking back. Remi was already there waiting for him. Remi was wearing a light pink suit jacket with green trimmings on it. His dress pants were a matching green. Remi's hair, as always, was loose and fluffy looking, not having been styled at all. Demian strode up to Remi and grabbed his hand, placing a kiss onto the back of it. You look amazing, he told Remi honestly. Remi's eyes were glued onto his hand, which Demian still had a hold of. His face was a beautiful shade of crimson. For all of his talk, Remi was just as innocent as he was. Then thank you, Remi stuttered. He finally pulled his eyes away and gave Demian a long once-over. You look good enough to eat, Remi said, his confidence coming back. Shouldn't that be his line? Demian released a low chuckle. Say that without turning red as a tomato, he said instead of what he really thought. If Remi wanted to wear this kind of facade, then let him, because he was cute either way. Remi tugged his hand out of Demian's, the tips of his ears turning red. Let's go. Demian shook his head before catching up to the quickly retreating Remi. He grabbed Remi's arm and looped it through his. Where's your guard? He asked, finally noticing the suspicious absence of Dane. I told him the wrong time, Remi admitted, not denying Demian's words. Ha! Demian couldn't help but to exclaim as he playfully pointed a finger at Remi. You didn't deny it. Deny what? Remi asked before he had realized exactly what Demian had said. Oh! He rubbed the back of his head with his free hand, ruffling up the back of his hair, making it even fluffier. Forget it, Demian said, not liking how quiet Remi had become. They walked underneath the large stone gate that separated the campus from the campus town. The whole entire campus and the small city were surrounded by a large brick wall with gates located in each of the 4 cardinal directions. Everyone that entered through the academy's gates had to have some kind of permit, whether it be a student, citizenry, or merchant permit. The small city was located on the west side of the campus. It was a quaint little town where everyone knew each other. The shop merchants were friendly and welcoming towards the academy students. Demian and Remi made their way to Lorla's. It was a two-story building with the shop downstairs and the shop owner's home on the second floor. The gray brick building had a blue-painted roof and awning. There was a sitting area outside enclosed in a little fenced-in patio. A blue sign with the shop's name hung out front. The place was already busy. Remi unlinked his arm from Demian's and grabbed his hand, pulling him inside the shop. The scent of sugary bread and various fruits such as strawberries, mulberries, oranges, kiwis, and more filled the air. Demian ordered a small box of macarons for himself while Remi picked out a 3-layer chocolate cheesecake with raspberry topping and a fruit tart. Once they had their order, they went back outside and sat down at one of the empty tables. "I can't believe all you got were plain macarons," Remi complained. The macarons were a simple meringue-based cookie with no fruit or added flavor. That's not saying the shop didn't sell them, because they did. Some of the macarons in the display case were vivid in color and lined with fruit or decorative candies. Demian just wasn't that big on sweets, but he didn't want to make Remi feel awkward if he were to be the only one eating. "And I can't believe you picked that lump of sugar," Demian teased Remi. "Sugar can be a good source of energy." Remi then stuck a forkful into his mouth, his cheeks bulging with each chewing motion. Demian chuckled at the chipmunk-like vibes that Remi was pulling off. He grabbed the handkerchief that was stashed in his breast pocket and leaned over the table to wipe the edges of Remi's lips that were smeared with chocolate. "What are you? A child or a chipmunk?" Remi stuck his tongue out, then promptly shoved another huge bite into his mouth. After the two of them finished their desserts, they continued walking around the main shopping district. Neither of them really had the chance to explore the city in great detail and took the time to do that now. They walked in and out of stores for a couple of hours, most of that time spent in the local library. The selections were more diverse than the library on campus, and Demian was pretty sure this was where Remi had gotten his study material from. After that, they made their way to a popular restaurant. Demian had to admit that the food was excellent and definitely more flavorful than some of the things that the palace chef would whip up. Demian had fun the entire date, and it was made even better that they never saw hide nor hair of Dane. Demian was still suspicious and wary of the beta that was constantly around Remi. He knew he shouldn't be, since Remi had mentioned that he only saw Dane as a sibling figure, and for the fact that Demian and Remi still weren't officially together. Actually, Demian wasn't sure about that last part. He was too afraid to ask Remi since this was only their first date. When they were done eating, they decided to head back to the campus since it was growing late in the day. Demian was leading them in the direction of Remi's dorm when Remi stopped him by pulling on his arm. "Is our date really going to end after you walk me back?" Remi complained with a cute pout. "Do you not want it to end?" Demian asked hopefully. Remi pressed himself closer to Demian, then leaned up onto his tiptoes. "I would prefer it if I woke up next to you," he whispered into his ear. His blood turned warm and all that heat instantly pooled down into his lower half, stirring it awake. This beta was going to be the death of him. Remi started to pull away, his mouth growing farther away from Demian's ear. Demian turned his head slightly and brought a hand up and placed it on the back of Remi's neck to stop him from moving. "I would prefer that too." Demian was surprised with how low and gravelly his voice sounded, but he brushed the thought off just as quickly as it came. He edged his face closer to Remi's, his eyes trained on those infuriatingly enchanting lips. "Demian." The booming, almost deafening voice scared the shit of Demian enough that he paused in his action of getting ready to kiss Remi. "Damn it," Remi muttered under his breath, the low growl clearly filled with anger. Demian shared his sentiments. "What?" His voice was sharp as he turned his focus onto the unwanted intruder. His eyes narrowed into slits and his stare was icy. Laxel didn't shirk underneath Demian's bone-chilling glare or Remi's extremely loud scoff laced with uncouth curse words. Laxel ran a veiny hand through his short, untamed mop of red hair. What did you do to Ophelia? She's been depressed and upset to the point that she refuses to leave her room. Laxel accused. Demian rolled his eyes, his anger only intensifying. He really wished he could go back in time and smack himself for ever making the decision of getting close to Ophelia, for even entertaining a thought about her. I only told her the truth. I am not sure why I ever approached her, but it ends now. Demian admitted. You can't do that to her. Laxel screamed, angered on Ophelia's behalf. Why are you even here? Shouldn't you be making the most out of having one less competitor? Remi voiced in, his arms crossed over his chest. Laxel opened his mouth to say something before shutting it. His finger, which had been pointed at Demian, finally dropped. You're right, he finally mumbled. You're right, he said, louder this time. I should do everything I can to show Ophelia that I will never leave her side. Laxel chanted excitedly. Good, now leave. Demian said. He had to hand it to Remi for knowing just what to say. Laxel nodded his head. His eyes had a glassy, faraway look in them, as if he were in deep thought. He turned back in the direction he had come from, all the while mumbling under his breath. Demian released a breath of hot air, his anger instantly melting away. Shall we continue where we left off? He asked Remi, his lips quirking up into a half smirk. No. Remi unfolded his arms, then started walking in the direction of his dorm. Demian ran after Remi and grabbed his arm gently but firm enough to get him to stop walking. What do you mean by no? Demian was so going to kill Laxel for ruining the mood. I mean exactly what I said. We are not going to continue nor move on any farther physically until you sort out this whole Ophelia business. Remi's lips turned down into a pout, drawing Demian's eyes to them. But there is nothing to sort out. I already told her that she will only be seen as a classmate to me, Demian explained, once again wishing that he could go back in time. The pout lifted minutely from Remi's face, and a hopeful glow came over his eyes. We are still not getting physical. That's fine, Demian immediately replied, wanting to do whatever he could to appease this man to keep him by his side. This urge was so strong that he should have questioned why he felt this way but didn't. The pout completely lifted and Remi gave a small smile. He leaned up onto his toes and kissed Demian's cheek. Good night. Remi then took off, disappearing inside the building that they had unknowingly arrived at. Demian stood stock still for a few seconds before he realized what had happened. He raised a hand up and placed it on his cheek. The feeling of the warm and soft touch of Remi's lips that was so feather-light lingered against his skin. An unconscious smile appeared on his face as he made his way back to his own dormitory. The sky was now a vibrant orange and there weren't many people out and about. A light breeze ruffled his hair, stirring his thoughts. Not only would he have to figure out how to quell Remi's worry, he would also need to figure out if he should reveal his secret. He unconsciously rubbed the small black stud that was pierced in his ear, a habit built up from all the years of having to wear it. The white and black speckled stones that made up the dormitory's exterior came into view. In the shadows beneath the black awning was a shadow pacing back and forth. The pacing figure came to a stop before rushing out into the light. It was none other than Ophelia. Ophelia rushed out towards him, her delicate lips caught between her teeth as she worried them between her teeth. Demian. Lady Rosewood, I thought I told you to stop this. Demian said curtly. Ophelia's ocean green eyes, reminiscent of aquamarine, flashed with a dangerous light. The worried nervousness that had seemed to possess her evaporated as if it had never been there. Demian felt that something was odd and decided to prepare himself in case an altercation arose. Everything would have gone smoothly if it were not for him. Ophelia's quiet admission startled Demian enough that his guard lowered minutely. What do you mean by that? What would have gone smoothly? Demian asked. A smile suddenly morphed onto Ophelia's face and she appeared innocently docile. Demian took a step back, weary of her sudden change. Before Demian could act or even blink, Ophelia whipped out a perfume bottle from the pocket of her skirt. She pressed on a nozzle and a cloud of visibly pink perfume shot out, covering him in an instant. Something told Demian not to breathe in this mysterious substance, so he quickly shut his mouth and held his nose. An eerie cackle spilled out of Ophelia's twisted mouth. That won't work. I spent all day modifying the formula so that it will seep in through the pores even if it isn't breathed in. You should have been a good boy like the others and ate the cookies. A shiver ran down Demian's spine and his mind grew hazy. He should have realized sooner that something was in the sweets she made. He had thought they were fine since he hadn't dropped dead, and because they weren't overly sweet, he decided to eat them instead of letting them go to waste. He realized too late what a careless fool he had been. Even with a haze-filled mind, he tried to escape. He needed to find a teacher or guard. He wasn't sure what Ophelia was planning but knew that whatever it was, it couldn't be a good thing. That maniacal cackle resounded behind him, filling him with a sense of dread. That won't work. The dosage is much stronger than before. Soon, you'll become my mindless slave. Demian's thoughts immediately went into overdrive at her words. Slave. Mindless. What in the world was coming out of this crazy Omega's mouth? His movement slowed to a snail's pace and his eyesight darkened. His thought process slowed down until it was almost non-existent. Demian, come here, Ophelia commanded, that fake sweetness in her voice once again. Demian felt his body move of its own accord. It slowly turned around and began walking towards the awaiting Ophelia. No. Stop. The little part of Demian's mind that was still awake screamed at himself, trying everything in its small power to resist her. All to no avail. His body came to a stop in front of Ophelia. She raised a delicate hand and placed it on the side of his face, the cheek that Remi had kissed just moments before. It was the day after Remi had his first date with Demian. It had been perfect except for the part where Laxel showed up. But even that minor intrusion couldn't stop him from floating on cloud 9 even on the day after. Some people may call him stupid for wasting his time chasing after someone who had literally been chasing after another person, but Demian Maxwell had been his favorite route to play when he had lived as Haruki Sato. It had been disappointing and heartbreaking when Demian started acting like the Demian from the game and following Ophelia around. Remi had been torn between watching his favorite scenes unfold or breaking them apart. It had always been apparent that he wanted Demian. He just wasn't sure if he could change fate or if fate would even allow him to change it. Remi mindlessly filled his plate up with various breakfast foods, all while humming happily. Dane narrowed his eyes at Remi, his lips twitching. I don't know if I should be happy for you or tell you how annoying you are being. Remi threw a look over his shoulder and scoffed. You just did. He slid his tray down the line until it was full before making his way to an available table, Dane close behind him. Did you find anything out? Remi was asking about the task he had assigned to Dane the day before. It was mainly assigned so that Remi could have a peaceful date with Demian, but he was genuinely curious. He had asked Dane to verify if Shanna was really the one who brought the Morona herbs on the trip. His curiosity had been piqued when Dane told him that Shanna had no signs of them on her person or in her belongings during the hunting trip. Remi decided to not ask how Dane had checked her person. So hearing that, then finding out that the knight had found a bag of crushed Morona leaves in Shanna's spare hunting garments was strange. The two discoveries contradicted each other. Something just wasn't adding up, or there was a missing piece that Remi had yet to uncover. No, I did ask the Information Guild to find anyone who may have purchased them. Morona leaves were illegal in the Bastinine Empire and almost every kingdom on the continent except for the Kancha Islands and the Westmore Kingdom. And Vizia, the Information Guild, was usually the first to know when someone made an illegal purchase, especially if that illegal purchase came from the black market. Remi had found out after his reincarnation that the Information Guild and the black market had close ties. It was so close that the leader of the Information Guild also held dealings and illegal gambling houses in the black market. This information hadn't been in the game, nor was it common knowledge in this world. But Dane and Remi happened to personally know the Vizia Guild master personally and even had a special relationship with them. That mysterious leader was none other than his dear sister-in-law's elder brother. That discovery had shocked him so much that he almost suffered from a premature heart attack. His elder brother, Carlton Arlo, was the crown prince and had married the daughter of a baron 2 years ago. That baron's daughter was named Vivian Fontaine, and she had an elder brother of 4 years who would always come over when chaperoning Vivian's and Carlton's dates while they were still engaged. That elder brother's name was Alex Fontaine. Alex was a tall and willowy man with bright green eyes and curly brown hair. He wore round wire-framed glasses and had a smattering of freckles on his face. He was quiet and bookish, a typical loner nerd. Not the type of person to be running an information guild and illegal gambling houses right under everyone's noses. Good, Remi hummed, biting off a piece of crispy bacon. They said they'll have a list of buyers by the start of the week, Dane informed him. Hum. Remi was going to say more, but the sight at the entrance of the cafeteria had him speechless. No, it had him more than speechless. A hot flash of jealousy and a flare of anger rushed through him, as did the freezing sadness of heartbreak. Walking in through the doors was Ophelia. Since it was the weekend, she was dressed in a casual dress that had a blue and white plaid skirt with a white shirt with a blue ruffled collar. Walking beside her was Laxel, who wasn't looking all too pleased. The usually not there Ebony Lestro, whose lavender hair was tied to the side of his head and his maroon eyes flashed as he took in the people in the cafeteria, was also with her. And Demian's dark blue hair, which was usually stylishly messy, was flat and lifeless. Dark purple bags hung heavy underneath his eyes and his skin was a sickly, dull ivory color. The four of them made their way to the line. Two of the boys surrounded Ophelia on either side while Laxel took the rear. What the hell, Dane growled, his eyes locked onto Demian's stiff form. His anger rising on Remi's behalf. Remi narrowed his eyes. The hand holding the fork tightened to the point that the handle of the fork started to bend. What the hell is he thinking? Dane growled out, his dark eyes flashing dangerously. That's exactly what Remi wanted to know too. What in the world was that two-timer thinking? When the group of four started to walk by their table, Remi stood up and grabbed Demian's arm. Demian stopped and stared down at him like he was looking at a fly. Those navy blue eyes that Remi loved lacked the spark that was always in them. We need to talk. Ophelia, who had stopped walking when she noticed what was happening, smiled. You may talk with him. As if he were a dog waiting for permission, Demian came to life and followed Remi out of the cafeteria after Ophelia had given him permission. Remi led Demian out into the hall. He came to a stop and whirled around until he faced the listless prince. What are you doing? He crossed his arms over his chest and tapped his fingers against his arm after a few moments of silence from Demian. Well? Remi asked. I am in low I have decided to be with. There was a long pause before Demian continued. Ophelia. Demian's voice was slow and he sounded unsure of himself. He even stumbled over himself a few times. Really? Remi asked, keeping his emotions in check. Yes. I choose Ophelia. Not you. Snap. Remi's tapping fingers wrapped around his arm, his fingernails digging in hard enough to draw blood through the thin jacket of the suit modeled after the Empire's fashion that he was currently wearing. His jaw clenched tightly, trying to keep himself from cursing this stupid prince out of existence. Fine. You had your fun, he spit out through clenched teeth. Remi whirled around and marched out of the cafeteria, not bothering with going back in there. He didn't want to be around that peaceful, carefree propensity that belonged to the students in the cafeteria. He should have known better. He was the idiot who thought he could change the route that fate had already mapped out for them. Tears budded in the corners of his eyes. It was the first time he had felt like this about someone. Sure, he had casual relationships in his last life, if you count the one, but not in this life. Nor had he fallen so hard for some after just one date in either life. He had wanted to be with Demian so badly that he had never thought to think of the consequences that he would suffer from should he fail to break the predetermined path that Demian was set to live out. I am in low I have decided to. The word spilled out of Demian's mouth unwillingly. Be with Ophelia. Why was he saying this? Why were these blasphemous words coming out of his mouth? He watched as Remi's beautiful eyes dulled in color. A silvery sheen glistened in their corners. Demian's heart thumped loudly against his chest. He opened his mouth to try to say something, anything, but nothing would come out. Come on. Say something, anything. Fine. You had your fun. Demian could hear the strain in Remi's voice and his heart broke. Remi then whirled around so fast that it was head spinning, and just like that, he was gone. No. Chase after him. Move. Come on, damn it, move. Demian stood there, wanting nothing more than to chase after Remi, but his body refused to listen to him. He mentally gritted his teeth, unable to do anything else. Ever since last night, his body has refused to listen to him. It moves on its own, or whenever Ophelia commands something of him. His mind has also been dark and hazy. This was the first time in hours that he had been able to produce conscious thought, and it was absolutely terrible. The things that came out of his mouth were hurtful and utterly disgusting, things that he didn't mean in the least. Once he is able to break free from this cursed spell or whatever it is she has done to him, he'll kill her. Well, he'll have her tried, tortured, and executed. The lights around him started to darken and his thoughts slowed down to a slur. No. He didn't want to go back to that bizarre limbo-like state he had been in for the last 10 hours. The clacking of heels alerted him to another presence. A sickly sweet smell of lavender and moonflower wafted in the air, tickling his nose. Fuck. There you are, came a soft voice filled with insincere, tender emotions. Ophelia came into view, the only thing clear in his dark, straw-like filter of a vision. Oh. Her voice rose an octave, a curious note in her tone. Maybe the dose wasn't strong enough. She tapped a slender finger against her dainty chin. Her eyes narrowed for a split second before her features schooled back into that innocent facade she always wore. Whatever. Let's head back inside. She turned around and, like a marionette tied to a string, his body awkwardly followed after her. She led him to the table where the others were. His body sat down in front of where his tray was laying, courtesy of Laxel, who had taken his plate when Remi had called him out into the hall. He watched as his hand mechanically reached for the silverware. Was anyone else aware that his movements seemed unnatural? He really hoped so. Maybe someone could figure out what was going on with him and save him if he was unable to do it himself. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, warning him that someone was watching him. It was strange that he could feel that when he felt so detached from everything else. He tried forcing his head to move, to turn in the direction where the stare was coming from. All that accomplished was tiring out what little of his mental state was left, and his eyesight fully blackened. Dane stood up from the table when he noticed that Demian had returned without Remington. He shot a glare at the mindless prince as he hurried out in search for his liege. When Dane did not see him in the hallway, he rushed over to his and Remington's dorm. It would be better to check there first than to randomly run all over the place in a foolhardy and time-consuming search. Dane rushed over to the dorm and ran up the flight of stairs to where Remington's room lay on the second floor. He gently tapped on the door. The sound of shuffling on the other side told him that Remington was there. The door opened to reveal Remington. His sand-color-like skin was pale and his cheeks and nose were rosy and splotchy. The skin directly underneath his eyes were pink and the white of his eyes were red. At the sight of his liege, Dane immediately wanted to storm right back to that cafeteria and take his sword to the brainless, stubborn bastard. Instead, he pushed his way into the room and wrapped his best friend of 13 years into a hug. Dane didn't know what heartbreak felt like, but he certainly knew what it looked like from seeing it through his mother. Remington leaned into the embrace and sniffled. I really am stupid, huh? Remi asked through the sniffles. Yeah, and he's a bastard. Dane's honest answer drew a small laugh out of Remington. Remington pulled away and sat down on the bed. He is a bastard, Remington agreed. Dane arched up one bushy eyebrow, surprised at how easily Remington admitted that. Shall I kill him? Remington shook his head. No, but I would like to ask him how he changed his tune in just a few short hours. Remington curled his fingers in the silk sheets. It really seemed like everything was going perfectly, that he actually had feelings for me. Remington shook his head wistfully. It looks like I really can't beat an Omega. You are an Omega, Dane reminded him. Yes, but he doesn't know that. Remi said with a sigh. Then tell him, but if he starts chasing you again then leave him. You do not deserve such a fickle person. Nor did he deserve to go through this. Remington was a beloved prince and a rare male Omega. There were only 12 male Omegas reported within the Harlow, Ashen, and Grove kingdoms combined. And only 7 in the Bastinian Empire. Remington hummed. He leaned back into the bed. No, it's better this way. Let's just focus on the Shanna thing. Alright. Dane hesitated with his next words. Should I put this in the report? Dane may be loyal to Remington, but he was required to write a report once a week and send it to Prince Carleton and the King and Queen. When Dane said that Remington was a beloved prince, he really meant it. If they were to find out that Remington had been treated in this manner, the King and Crown Prince would not hesitate to wage war on the Grove Kingdom. The royal family even abolished the established religion within the kingdom and started a new one, all because of Remington. The faith of Amarith was the main religion in the Ashen Kingdom and the Bastinian Empire, as well as the rest of the kingdoms. The faith of Amarith was established over 200 years ago and rapidly grew, establishing a large base of followers. The reason it had been abolished in the Ashen Kingdom was because the religion did not acknowledge reincarnation, but vehemently rejected it. Reincarnation was not a common belief nor one anyone entertained. That was until Remington Arlo was born. When Remington was 9, he had confided in his parents and brother about his past life. Dane had found out about it when he officially became Remington's personal knight. He still didn't know all the details because Remington hardly shared anything about his past life, but that didn't matter to him, nor did it matter to the royals in the Ashen Kingdom. Remington was Remington no matter what, and that meant that they could not follow the faith of Amarith because they officially acknowledged and accepted reincarnation to show their support and love to Remington. The change of religion had caused several disputes and put the throne in a rocky position for a year, but things calmed down after a while. Though it did put the Ashen Kingdom in a politically rocky position with the other kingdoms, though not that bad. That could easily be seen in this academy. He and Remington had been able to get along with the other students, and there had only been a few who had brought it up with them. One had even called them barbarians, but that was the most hostility that they had been met with since the start of the school year. No, you can tell them that things did not go the way I had hoped. Remington finally answered him after some thought. Before departure, Remington had told him and his brother that he wanted to pretend to be a beta because he was hoping to find someone to love him for him and not for his status. Carleton had of course agreed, then ordered Dane to update him weekly. Last week, Dane had reported that Remington had developed feelings for an alpha prince and was even going on a date with him. He had of course received permission from Remington to report this much. Prince Carleton, and the king as well, had sent a reply telling him to dispose of the prince if any harm were to come to Remington. So Dane had absolute faith that war would be waged if the royal family were to ever find out what happened. Understood, Dane answered.